Well, hello there. My name is Carrie, and today we are going to set off on a little adventure.
Let's get this mother crawl!
We're going to start a project together that's pretty much guaranteed to level up your image making skills.
So freaking effing excited!
We're going to try to crack open some of your normal processes and habits, juice them up, and by the end of this series, you'll be making stuff you didn't think you could.
Yes!
We'll start with some pure form making, and it'll be really constrained, which will challenge you to move a little beyond your usual bag of tricks so you can find some new ways to think about making things. In other words, your trick bag shall overfloweth with riches. Now, design principles are really critical to the foundation of everything we do, from design itself to animation to production. So design principles are what we're really focused on. And that starts with a rock-solid foundation in visual form. So at first, we'll be referring to principles we talked about in episode 3 about composition and buttsplosions, if you want to refresh yourself on some of that. But we'll go over it in detail, so don't you worry your sweet little face, your beautiful little face, I just want to... Now, this project has several parts to it, and over the next few weeks, we'll ratchet up the complexity, picking up some really useful skills for making cooler stuff. And when we finish, there's a big surprise waiting for you. It might be a trampoline party or a pizza cake. That's a lie, but I've really worked to hone this exercise, and it's super powerful whether you've done this sort of thing before or not, and whether you're a student or an industry pro. It's a really great one for everyone at every level, and it only gives back what you put into it, but it's surprisingly simple, so you definitely want to dive in as deep as you can. I'm going to be doing it too, and I'll show you exactly what comes out of my part of it each step of the way. Now at the start, it's not going to turn out show the world kind of stuff. Although if you're brave, you can post your results up for everyone to point and laugh at, just like I'll be doing here. Oh God. For real, the first few challenges here aren't in any way meant to be seen by anyone, but we'll get there. And anything you make going forward is going to be improved by the things that you'll figure out while doing this stuff. And that's a really good thing. Just in the last year, I've made everything from this to this to this. And all this is informed by the same basic strategies that we're about to explore. And that's not to say that you'll end up making stuff that looks similar to mine. Almost totally the opposite, actually. We're going to build a foundation that will allow you to make things more consistently in your own voice. But first things first, to start, all you got to do is pick one of these shapes. Circle, square, triangle. Doesn't really matter which, they're all equal. You know, don't be a racist about it. Equality for all shapes. Just pick one, I'll wait. All right, but hurry up, I'm getting bored. Okay, that's your shape. You're stuck with that one for a minute, no takebacks. Don't worry, you picked the best one anyway. What are you worried about? All we're going to do is make a handful of images out of only that shape and nothing else. I mean, no big deal, right? Just that they better be amazing or no one's ever going to love you and your whole life is ruined. Okay, we're going to start with a white canvas at a 1:1 aspect ratio. So that's a square if you're dumb. At this point, it's going to be best to use a vector-based drawing app like Adobe Illustrator or Affinity Designer, as opposed to a compositing or painting app or doing it by hand on paper. And we definitely don't want to work in 3D either, at least not yet. We want flat, perfect shapes with perfectly consistent line quality and the ability to manipulate the shapes as we like and to iterate super fast. If you have to use something like Photoshop or something else, aim for a resolution of 1080 by 1080. But otherwise, Illustrator or something similar is really primed for exactly this. And all we're going to do is take this square canvas and start adding our shape of choice in black only. No grays, no whites, just black shapes. Only black shapes. We'll basically just populate the frame with them however we like. Resize them, overlap them, spin them. Well, okay, good luck with that. Shove them off the edge, do whatever you like as long as you don't stretch or change the shapes themselves. So nothing like blurring or distortion or painting, no transparency. Moving, resizing, rotating, that's it. And all we're doing is trying to make compositions that are interesting to look at in some way. Maybe because they're dynamic, maybe because they're subtle. Whatever you want to aim for. The point is to really think about the most basic strategies of visual form making. And for us, that means contrast. Contrast in scale and weight, pattern and texture, density, direction, line quality, color and value. Using those contrasts to generate things like movement in a still image and imply depth where there is none, and to lead the eye around by creating visual hierarchy. Now, there are a bunch of different frameworks for thinking about making good art. Language that focuses on whether something is organic or structured, or whether there's a certain kind of flow to your lines, or maybe there's a real focus on theories of balance. And any of that may be useful to you too, but visual contrasts are actually more fundamental, and I think more useful no matter where you are in your image making skills, because everything builds up from these 6 simple dimensions. And what's great about this first challenge is the fact that we have so little to work with. A single black shape and really nothing but these basic compositional strategies to make it in any way interesting. So that's the trick at this point. It's not super easy to work with so little, and it'll stretch you. So you'll have to get clever about it and try some things you wouldn't normally. Even more so because at first, we're going to focus only on contrasting scale, texture, and density. And not that you don't already know, but just as a little refresher so we're on the same page, let's go over them real quick. The contrast and scale are the easiest. Big and small. Huge and tiny. Well, this is preschool stuff, obviously, but oh my God, is it the most useful preschool stuff there is. I mean, it's on the level of potty in the toilet, not in your pants. Simple stuff, and yet you're still using it decades later, right? Right? I hope. Variations in scale are absolutely everywhere. They're the rule, not the exception, and you should probably be thinking about accentuating them just about every time you do anything in the frame. Objects at different scale give each other context through their comparison. They give the eye a reason to travel, albeit really quickly, first to one element and then to others through a simple hierarchy of importance. Without noticeable contrast in scale, our eyes have a little bit harder time distinguishing between elements. And sometimes similarity is a quality you want to highlight and exploit. But for this first exercise, probably not as much. For right now, we want to accentuate contrasts. So when you think you've gone big, go bigger. And when you've gone small, go smaller. Proportion is always important, but there's a bunch of different thinking about proportion, like the golden section and all that stuff. And I find it really just takes pushing each of the contrasts over the edge so you can figure out where that edge is and when to dial it back a little to balance things out. So for now, we're just going to go for extremes and dial it in from there. Now, another critical tool here is texture. Obviously, in the real world, everything you can see has texture. Everything. And the types and qualities of textures out there are almost infinite in number. Textures at the micro scale and at the macro scale. They're so ubiquitous in real life that things that appear to not have texture seem unreal to us. And rightly so. So once we start making things, a lack of texture is the reason things generated by software defaults generally feel computery. They feel a little unreal. Now, maybe that certain type of unreal is actually what you're aiming for, but in most cases, perfectly flat color or gradients in Photoshop feel Photoshoppy. 3D objects rendered without bump and grain and tactility and variation feel 3D. We might call them plasticky because they feel unnatural. So there's a lot of effort in 3D rendering in particular to introduce materiality like grit and displacement and atmosphere and lighting and all these things that increasingly specify the textures in the final image because our eyes pull tons of information from the qualities of textures, even if they're really subtle. And you can use those qualities to play a huge role in what your audience takes from your imagery. That said, in a broader sense, texture in an image is really just variations in color and value at the very smallest scales. So you can actually generate a certain amount of texture even without real-world materials. You can do it with just shapes. Well, probably tiny shapes like these, but shapes nonetheless, which is something to consider in the first few exercises we'll do. For example, this is a lot of things. It's a bunch of squares for one, and it's textural. This obviously has much less apparent texture, if any at all. There's a definite contrast in the intensities of these two textures, high versus low intensity or zero intensity. And just as important, there's also a contrast in the qualities of those textures. Rough or chaotic versus flat or smooth. Contrasting different textures and their various qualities can help your audience see them relative to each other, just like with bigger and smaller scales. Seeing these two together, you might now instead think about this one as being more organic and this as more ordered. Biologically speaking, our visual systems actually look at things in relative terms by comparing one thing to another and spotting the differences, by spotting the contrasts. And it does the majority of that at ridiculous speeds, so fast that we're largely not even conscious of it, which is partly why thinking about contrasts is so effective. It actually blows past everything else and addresses how we literally see the world. So really, it's a lot of texture compared to less texture, and this texture versus this one. This is a pattern, I'm sure you're aware, and a pattern is a texture. Like if you look at the set of all possible visual textures, patterns are just a subset of that whole. Patterns are easy to contrast, and you can certainly have small-scale textures woven into large-scale patterns and vice versa. Texture is a simple, powerful tool to wield for conveying all sorts of things. But even just on the level of basic compositional strategies, you can always think about contrasting the types or intensities of textures of any kind, even if only to help the eye delineate elements from each other or to guide the eye from one area to another. And I'm sure you're familiar with this stuff on some level, but the distinctions are important here because we're really laying the groundwork for what's to come. So now density might seem just stupidly simple. A contrast in density means that visually, one area of a composition is sparser than another, or an area is denser. Again, it's always relative and by comparison. So however you want to think about it, one area has more interesting stuff going on and another has less. The opposite would be an even smear, which is bewildering. The eye needs a little density just to know where to look. Your eye goes here, obviously. Low density, kind of medium density, highest density. Low, medium, high. Low, medium, high. Where's the most action? Here. Here. This can be due to the number and type of elements packed into a space or the values of certain elements in the frame. It can be a textural density even. The coarse sharpness here versus the smoothness makes for a textural density. As a side note, that's a big part of how depth of field helps draw the eye to the focal plane. There's decreasing amounts of detail to pay attention to out here. And it's driven by texture. Lots of little things going on versus not as many things going on. These are simple examples, of course. They really just have single concentrated areas of density, whereas many images may have a variety of hotspots of different intensities to keep the eye interested and moving. And not every image needs to have an incredible range of density from low to high. It's just one of the contrasts available to you. But it can be really helpful in guiding the eye to areas of interest. Here's a fancy example from Sommet that utilizes pretty much all of these things. This is effectively just a bunch of little uniform shapes. They're tiny squares. In a way, pretty similar to what we'll be using, right? There's a pattern constructed here, and that pattern is disrupted when those shapes are thrown into a different order. We're watching this on loop, but I guarantee that the first time you watched it, your eye followed this wave of encroaching chaos here. And not just because it's moving, because in all fairness, the patterned surface and the background lighting are moving too. Case in point, if we freeze it, this is still where your eye is drawn to the most, on average, because of the contrast. All of them are in play here, not the least of which are value and line quality and direction. But first, look at density. The most stuff is happening at the crest of this wave. The most novel details are here. This high intensity texture, that's where the action is. Second most is here with this pattern. Third clearly is here and here where there's not a whole lot going on visually. And you could definitely say that that density is driven in part by texture, right? Because this pattern is certainly dense compared to some things, but by comparison to this, it seems pretty orderly, regular, and inactive. Because this has tons of different little things going on, lots of different things to look at in a confined area. So you'd say the density is higher here. And then in motion again, it's easy to see the contrast in scale play out as this darker shape grows to completely overtake this lighter shape. So you end up looking at the leading edge of that for a combination of reasons. For being such seemingly simple dimensions, these three contrasts alone can play out in complicated, interconnected ways. And that's before they start evolving across time when put into motion. So with this first round, we're going to try to utilize mainly these three contrasts more intensely to make a definite impact. And we're going to start with a warm-up. This is like the pregame speed round. We're going to do 10 whole frames in just 10 minutes. And it'd be great if you could set a simple 60-second timer just to keep you moving at a faster pace than your brain might be ready to work at just yet. The point here is that you actually do need to loosen up a bit and get your brain in gear to do this sort of thing. And probably more than you think you do. I know that's true for me and just about everyone I know. So the first few you do might be absolute garbage. And then 5 minutes in, you might be like, that one was pretty good. I don't really need to do any more of these. I can move on. But don't. Just keep banging them out. It's only 10 minutes. You'll spend more than 10 minutes on your phone on the toilet and not even think about it. These definitely aren't going to be portfolio pieces. You're not going to show your mom. They're just for you. And in all likelihood, most of them are going to land somewhere between mediocre and terrible, as I shall now demonstrate. I'll say this though, the best way to do this is to go in fresh with no preconceived notions of how you should be making stuff. So ideally, we wouldn't look at any examples up front. But just for this first round, I'm going to bang a few of them out just to kind of show how it goes. I'll be using an older version of Illustrator, but it really doesn't matter at all. If you can't tell yet, the kinds of things we're focused on in this series are software agnostic. So your tools really aren't the key. Okay, we're aiming for about a minute, and for this round, we're going to try to think only about maximizing the contrast in scale, texture, and in density. Hopefully with just that, we can create some areas of interest. Now, just like an athlete, you're likely to be moving a little slower at the start. No worries, totally expected. Some tentative decision making, a little apprehension, maybe you just don't have any ideas yet. That's fine. That's why the warm-up and why it's so simplistic. We're not really looking to make anything meaningful. We're just aiming to maximize these contrasts. So if you're stuck, just throw some shapes around. Maybe make a quick pattern. Is it ugly? Doesn't really matter. Change the size. Flip that shit around. Knock something off center. Go for symmetry or asymmetry. Do anything, really. Do something you hate. Do something embarrassing. Intentionally make a piece of crap. I did. Look. Well, okay, it isn't intentionally bad. It just is bad. But there's the timer, so now I can say goodbye to that shit. I don't know you.
It's not my baby.
You're not my dad. Ugly ass fucking.
Whoa, kiddo, take it easy. All right, number 2. We're trying to maximize these types of contrast, so let's see if we can get more dramatic contrast in scale. Cool. We've got some hefty weight over to the left now, so let's just... Now it's fun-sized. Okay, well, let's go more extreme. Oh, look at that! Contrast in scale. Can we go for even higher contrast than that? Yeah, always. But this actually isn't bad. This kind of works. We've got a few seconds left and nope, fuck it. 30 seconds in, it's great, done. So now what are we gonna do? Well, all we're focused on is contrasting scale, texture, and areas of density. So instead of a huge monolithic block, maybe we'll go smaller. Maybe something chaotic with multiple tiny bits? Sure. So we're just working on simple contrasts, big and small, a lot versus a little. Takes a little more time to randomize and create more tiny bits, so maybe this one takes 90 seconds. That's okay. Do you hate it? That's okay too. No one cares. The point is to just keep pushing. We're warming up. This one's honestly not that bad, but remember, don't linger. And also, don't let the imperfections slow you down too much. That's for later. Next, more scale. Stretch yourself a bit. Get out there. Blow it up. Rock that boat. Maybe we can think more about the negative space here, about counterbalancing that huge weight on the left. That's cool. We've got about the same amount of black and white, and that's creating some new shapes. Let's throw in something smaller for contrast. How about if we align it with something so it's not floating randomly? Cool, done. So we just keep doing that until we hit 10. You can see how fast it goes. You're gonna feel a little rushed and kind of like you're churning out garbage. This quick exercise isn't about making anything amazing. It's about stretching. It really is a speed round. So race that clock. Make some surprisingly big moves. And just don't judge yourself too much. We just want to warm that brain up. I mean, you can see after 5, I'm not exactly warmed up at this point. This has almost no contrast in scale. I mean, I'd say it has none, but the white triangles created in the negative space here are, they're a touch larger. Hardly noticeable though, right? Textural contrast? Almost none as well. Maybe this pattern versus the white on the bottom? No, I mean, you can see for yourself it's not exactly pushing that very far. And as far as density, well, the contrast in density would mean one or more areas have a concentration of elements or a variation amongst elements. In general, some areas would have more interesting things going on. And that's really the crux of density, that some areas just have more for the eye to pay attention to than others. So does this? Yeah, no. But again, that's okay. We're taking warm-up shots before the game. We're doing vocal exercises before the performance. We're just having a quick stretch, so we're primed for the race. So here's the part where you have a go at that. Seriously, you were going to spend more than 10 minutes today watching garbage YouTube videos anyway. There's an Illustrator template already set up for you. Scale, texture, and density in large amounts. Okay, hit pause, bang them out real quick. Yes, right now. Ready? Go. Did you do it? If you didn't, just hit pause and do it real fast. You're already sitting there. So maybe some of those were amazing. Maybe some were embarrassing garbage. Maybe you're a god amongst the rest of us mere mortals and you just reinvented modern art. Probably not. It's fine. It's fine. The constraints and time limits are there to let your brain get in gear and up to speed, not to win any award shows. And you're totally welcome to keep at it if you feel like that wasn't quite enough. But now we're going to open it up and you can work at your own pace. We're going to do another set of 10, and you can take however long you think you should. Keep them to like 5-10 minutes or so, just so you don't spend your whole day doing this, because you're going to get tired. And if you want to split it up and do some now, some later, just do a few 60-second speed round compositions before you get back into it. It's weird that your brain needs warm-up time, but it really does. And you either already know or you'll figure out how much warm-up time generally works best for you. I'm usually something between 10 and 30 minutes, but everyone does better on pretty much any task once their brain is in gear for that task. And it's really no different here. And it makes the actual project we're going to do more potent for you if you're warmed up a bit when you do it. It's kind of like an effectiveness multiplier for this kind of stuff. So now it's actually time to get rad. Still working with the same shape, but now you can use black and white.
What?
And take however much time you need.
Yeah!
And we're still going to focus on intensifying these contrasts in scale, texture, and density where we can. But we also want to start using those three contrasts to create the illusion of movement and depth. Two strategies we'll get more into next chapter, but for our purposes right now, that means focusing on getting the viewer's eye to move around the frame, as well as indicating that there are elements in the foreground and elements in the background. We'll get more complicated pretty quickly as we move forward, but for now, no painting, no fading, no stretching, just you and some basic black and white shapes and your capacity to make something striking.
Okay!
Can you make it feel like it's flowing, exploding, receding into space, falling off the page? Can it be chaotic or orderly, or both at once? Do you want to make some that are minimal and some that are maximal? And while doing these, you may feel like you stall out at some point. If you do, make your moves bigger, like way bigger, or do something random or ridiculous and just leave it there and force yourself to work with it. A huge part of what's great about this exercise is the constraints. They can kind of rule out some of the habits and lazy tricks we might usually fall back on. So we end up only being able to push this idea of contrast harder. And when you do that, you'll undoubtedly end up giving yourself some new strategies you can use moving forward. And it's also about that moment where you feel like you do hit a wall and you have to stretch yourself to get around it. That's actually what you're hoping for. At some point, you want to feel like you're bottoming out or empty of ideas or like what you're doing isn't working. You want to be challenged at that moment and have an opportunity to push through it. And we'll push up against different constraints in each chapter as we tack on more complexity. But for now, all you get is black and white shapes, and your brain is gonna get bored of it. That's part of the point. So tell it to shut up and then make some huge moves. Increase the contrast and scale. Do something bonkers and figure out how to make it work. Oh, it didn't work? Do something else that's bonkers. There's literally no way to fail at this except to not do it. And you're almost guaranteed to discover something useful at each stage unless you sleepwalk through the whole thing. So make your moves, figure out how to make them work somehow, and then move on to the next one and do it again. And when you're finished banging out the 10th, look at what you've made so far. I guarantee that in that short amount of time, you'll already be able to see how to make some of them better. If you want, go ahead and make them better, refine them, or make your moves bigger, or both. And then do some more if you have time. You'll probably have more ideas by the time you're done. I mean, there's obviously a lot more than 10 good compositions in the realm of all possibilities. And you'll naturally cover some of the same territory everyone else does, but you'll also naturally do some stuff that's uniquely your own. So I'm going to rock my 10, and in the next part, I'll show you what I came up with in case there's something useful in there for you. They may mostly be crap, but there'll be something in there, I'm sure. It's kind of inevitable. This one is a win, however you slice it. And definitely resist the urge to watch ahead before doing your own 10. There are plenty of insights to take from one chapter to the next, but you'll hang on to the insights that you come up with yourself by doing the work. And you'll hang on to them more than anything else by far. So grab some of those insights first. And go ahead and do as many of them as you can now while you're still a little warmed up from the speed round. And remember to warm them brains up again if you come back to it later. So that's it. Pretty simple. Do 10. They don't have to take forever. Black and white only. No grays. Scale, texture, and density by the bucket load. And start using them to imply depth and movement where you can. And rock out on it.
Let's get this mother crock!
See you soon.